Alright, so for our 15th assignment, we are going to be talking about American foreign policy. This one's compelling policy question: what should be the goals of American foreign policy? To advance American interests or American ideals? In order to really get this, we have to figure out what we mean by interest and what we mean by ideals. So you need to click on the links to both and explain the definitions. So I'll explain to you first for definition number 3 of interest. You need to consider or think about, has anyone ever asked you or told you that's not in your best interest? What are they saying that means? And then ideals, think about your ideal spouse or your ideal house. You summarize that by filling this out. In summary, if America is following its interests, it means America is doing what's best for Latin. Then if America is following its ideals, it means America is standing up for what it blank. Fill that up. For our contemporary policy debate, we're going to be talking about what's going on in Hong Kong. I don't know if you all are aware of what has been happening starting last year in Hong Kong, but quick history lesson. Hong Kong is part of China that was taken over by Great Britain when they defeated China in the Opium Wars. You remember that from world history. Great Britain gave Hong Kong back to China in 1997 under the agreement that China would respect their rights. In 2019, the Hong Kong government was creating a policy about extradition that would allow the Chinese government to essentially take people from Hong Kong who committed a crime and give them a trial in China. If you were somebody who was from Hong Kong, do you really want to be given a trial outside of where you live? Do you think you get a fair trial? Anyway, so what happened is you're going to read this article. You need to know that protests there in result of that extradition bill grew to over 500,000 people in June. And the police response, they used fire hoses, tear gas, rubber bullets, live ammunition. As you can imagine, this picture shows, it got pretty violent. Read this article about a piece of legislation that was created in the United States in response to what was going on in Hong Kong. Consider this. What are the people in Hong Kong, according to the article, protesting for? Calls them pro fill in the blank. If we side with the people of Hong Kong, how might that upset the Chinese government? Consider what our relationship is with China. Can you see how this would be a American interests versus American ideals? If we do something that hurts our relationship with China, could that hurt our country? But if we don't defend the people of Hong Kong, are we not standing up for things we think are important? Answer those first 4 questions, then we'll move on to our past policy case. And we're going to be going back to the early 1900s and talk about the Philippines. This will make more sense if you talk about step 2A first. So we need to find out what was going on at the time. So go to the website, scroll down to the historic context. You need to know that the Philippines were originally a Spanish colony. Remember that America was once a colony of Great Britain. Did we like being a colony? Not so much. We fought a revolution against the British. That's why we became America. The Filipinos were not always happy under the Spanish, so they too were fighting revolutions against the Spanish. But the Spanish were far more powerful than they and were unable to secure independence on their own. In 1898, we had gone to war with Spain over Cuba because we saw Cuba suffering under Spanish control. And when we sent a ship down there to help the Cubans, it got bombed, so we went to war with Spain. We are now going to be fighting against Spain in Cuba and in the Philippines. Some people in America are worried that this means that we're trying to take over other places in the world. People think that we in America should be concerned about what's happening in America, not what's happening in the Philippines. We eventually defeat the Spanish and sign a peace treaty with them. The Treaty of Peace allowed us to buy the Philippines for $20 million. Quite a bit of money, but we took possession of the Philippines. Just imagine how the Filipinos felt about this. They had just been fighting a war for independence against the Spanish. We helped them defeat the Spanish. They maybe believe that they're going to now have their independence. But what happens is they end up being owned by America. As you can imagine, some Filipinos were not happy about this. Aguinaldo, the leader of the Philippines, condemned this as a violent and aggressive seizure by the U.S. What happens eventually is some American soldiers in the Philippines get into a fight with some Filipino soldiers. 3 Filipinos are killed, and basically a war breaks out. Filipinos are rebelling against us. And that leads to the creation of Senate Bill 2295 that we're going to talk about now. Break it down. Section 1. The President of the United States creates the Philippine Commission and gives the Commission the powers of government. Section 3. For as long as armed resistance continues in the Philippines, the President will control commerce with and within said islands. Section 4. That all inhabitants of the Philippine Islands are citizens of the Philippine Islands and are entitled to the protection of the United States. Section 5. No law on the island shall deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process, or deny to any person equal protection of the laws. Habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless in cases of rebellion, insurrection, or danger to the public safety may require it. Section 6. When the existing insurrection in the Philippines ends and peace is established, the President shall order a census of the Philippines. I'm going to skip you down here. Section 86. All laws passed by the government of the Philippine Islands shall be reported to Congress, which then has the power to annul the laws. So essentially, this piece of legislation is going to maintain United States control over the Philippines. If the Filipinos stop rebelling against us, we're going to help them create their own government. But when you look at all the details of this, who's really in control of the government? It appears the United States would be. So you need to understand, for this debate, what's happened is the Filipinos believe that they were going to get their independence from the Spanish. The United States helps them defeat the Spanish in a war, but then takes over. The Filipinos are fighting against us, and we promise that if they accept the United States is the one who's in charge of the Philippines, we'll help them develop a government for themselves. We need to now study why people believe that American foreign policy should pursue American interests. We're going to read a speech by a Republican senator named Henry Allen Cooper. He said, "We are in the Philippines to fulfill a duty which we owe to ourselves, to the people of the islands, and to the cause of civil liberty everywhere. We are in the islands to secure liberty and the benefits of civilization to a downtrodden race. Our opponents yell that our policy is a violation of liberty. They call us imperialists. They suggest in 4 years we leave the islands without regard to future consequences. The Filipino people need a stable government under the guidance of America, teaching them about individual liberty and self-government." These first couple sentences, he makes it seem like we have an obligation to be in the Philippines. Not because it's what's good for us, it's because it's what's good for them. He then says, "It is the duty of the United States to establish there a government and gradually give the people more and more rights to govern themselves, and only then further action may be taken. This bill is a solution to the problem in the Philippines. Whether we succeed or fail in these islands, the results will forever affect the prestige of this republic, and ultimately the whole human race. We should remember who we are. If we fail in the Philippines, our failure will be seen by all of the world forever." This paragraph sounds like if America, who's in charge of the Philippines, doesn't stay in charge as they should be in charge, doesn't do a good job, it's going to affect our country. So we need to take care of the Philippines in order to help ourselves. "We will plant firmly the principles of free government and fix forever guarantees of civil and religious liberty. We will emancipate a race and lead them to civilization. And then, when the Philippine Islands are peaceful, we who participate in this legislation will look back with hearts filled with pride and say, 'Thank God we did our part in the glorious work of a people's redemption.' We need to help the Philippines because it makes us look good." For our other piece of evidence, we're going to look at this cartoon titled, "And After All, the Philippines Are Only a Stepping Stone to China." We have in this cartoon Uncle Sam carrying a number of different goods. He's carrying them over to China. China wants to buy these products. These products were made in America. Is Uncle Sam just going to go give them to China? No, the plan is to sell them. In order to get to China, he seems to be stepping on the Philippines. Some people would say that if we were to take control of the Philippines and maintain control of the Philippines, it'd be good for our economy. Is that a reason why we should advance our interests? Because it makes us wealthy? Alright, we need to now find out why people think we should stand up for American ideals. We're going to read a speech by William Jennings Bryan. William Jennings Bryan said, "What is our title to the Philippine Islands? Do we hold them by treaty or by conquest? Did we buy them or did we take them? If governments get their just powers from the consent of the governed, it is impossible to secure title to the people, either by force or by purchase." This line, if governments get their just powers from the consent of the governed. What does consent mean? Consent is permission, right? So if people in the Philippines don't want us to be in charge, then should we be in charge? Remember that the Americans didn't want the British to be in charge anymore. We are made allies of the When we made allies of the Filipinos and armed them to fight against Spain, we disputed Spain's title to rule the Philippines. If we buy Spain's title, we are not innocent purchasers. There can be no doubt that we accept and utilize the services of the Filipinos, that when we did, we so had full knowledge they were fighting for their own independence. History has no example of such a horrible behavior than ours if we decide to substitute our yoke for the Spanish yoke. So, whose side do we want to be fighting on? Do we want to be standing up for the people who want to be independent? If America is trying to think about how things will play out in history, do we want to be standing up for the little guy? Or do we want to be standing up, or actually being, the abuser in the situation? He didn't want us to become Spain, who was ruling over the Philippines against the Filipinos' wish. Okay, now for a cartoon, we're going to look at this one down here. William H. Walker's Liberty Halt American Butchery. We have a Filipino in the left-hand corner and Uncle Sam in the right-hand corner, both of them holding swords, fighting against each other. Lady Liberty stands in the middle. Lady Liberty represents liberty, obviously. Whose side is she on? What side do we want to fight in? Make the connection here. What are the people in Hong Kong fighting for? Their liberties? Whose side do we want to be on? Alright, what were the results of the debate? So the United States did take over the Philippines, and from 1899 to 1902, Filipino revolutionaries fought against us. More than 4,000 American soldiers and nearly 20,000 Filipino fighters died in the fighting. An estimated 200,000 Filipino civilians died during the war. How do you think this made America look? We took over the Philippines from the Spanish, and then our rule in the Philippines was not welcomed, and it resulted in a very bloody war. Gradually, we started giving the Filipinos more rights, but it took a long time. In World War II, we were still in charge of the Philippines, but the Japanese took over the Philippines. The United States had to retreat from the Philippines, withdraw our military, but then after the war, during the war, we come back in the Philippines, liberate them from Japanese rule. But then does it really seem right for us to take it back over? We decided that after fighting a war for liberty, it's probably best to not continue to own another country that doesn't exactly appreciate us owning them. There are now 4 million U.S. citizens of Philippine ancestry living in the United States. We even have some at our school. So you should know that our relationship with the Philippines is now much better than it was during the time that we were fighting a war. Alright, to finish our lesson, comparison between the two, there's a place fighting for its independence. America was fighting against the Filipinos, and China is forcing control over Hong Kong. Email me if you have questions.